Have you ever wondered why you have your mother's eyes but your father's smile? It's one of those huge, fascinating mysteries of life, but the answer is actually written in a code hidden inside every single cell of your body. Today, we're going to crack that genetic code and uncover the incredible rules of heredity that make you, well, you.
We've all done it, right? You look in the mirror and you see a bit of your mom, a bit of your dad. We are so clearly a product of our parents. But we're not just a simple carbon copy, are we? We're a unique blend, kind of like a remix of their best features. So how does nature decide what to keep, what to toss out, and how to mix it all up? What are the rules that govern this amazing process? Well, let's find out. Okay, so the first piece of this whole puzzle is a really simple, but honestly, a profound idea: variation. You see, while every new generation inherits the basic blueprint from its parents, it also introduces these subtle little changes, or variations. And these small differences, they are the raw material for all the incredible diversity of life on Earth, and they're exactly what makes each of us completely and totally unique. Now, how much variation you get really depends on the reproductive strategy. With asexual reproduction, think of a bacterium just splitting in two, the offspring are pretty much perfect clones. The only differences come from rare, accidental mistakes when the DNA gets copied. But with sexual reproduction, the kind we humans use, the whole process is designed to shuffle the genetic deck. This deliberate mixing is the engine that creates the unbelievable diversity of traits we see all around us. So if all these traits are being shuffled around, how do they also get passed down so reliably? For that, we've got to go back, way back, to the 19th century and the garden of a friar named Gregor Mendel. Through these incredibly detailed experiments with thousands of simple pea plants, he, all by himself, discovered the fundamental rules of inheritance that govern all complex life, including us.
Mendel's experiment was just brilliant in its simplicity. So he took a pure-breeding tall pea plant and crossed it with a pure-breeding short one. Now, logically, you might think you'd get a bunch of medium-sized plants, right? But nope, that's not what he got. Every single plant in this first generation was tall. It was like the trait for shortness just vanished into thin air. But this is where it gets really interesting. When Mendel took those new tall plants and bred them with each other, something amazing happened. The shortness trait, which had been totally hidden, suddenly popped right back up. And believe me, this was no fluke. Mendel was a brilliant scientist who kept amazing records. He saw this pattern happen over and over and over again. For every 4 plants in that second generation, 3 were tall and 1 was short, a consistent, predictable 3-to-1 ratio. This simple little mathematical relationship was the key that would unlock the entire secret of heredity. So, what did that 3-to-1 ratio actually mean? Well, it told Mendel that traits weren't just blending together like paint. No, instead, some traits could actually mask or dominate other ones. And this led to his most important insight about how inheritance is really controlled. Mendel figured that for any given trait, an organism gets 2 instructions, what we now call genes, 1 from each parent. He realized one of these instructions could be dominant, meaning it always shows its effect, like the gene for tallness, and the other could be recessive, meaning its effect is hidden unless you happen to inherit 2 copies of it, like the gene for shortness. This chart here shows us the hidden genetics behind that 3-to-1 ratio. You see, those first-generation plants all looked tall, but their genetic makeup was TT. They were carrying that recessive T gene without showing it. So when they reproduce, they can pass on either a T or a T, and this leads to 3 possible genetic combos in their offspring. TT, which is tall, TT, still tall because T is dominant, and TT, short. And there it is, 3 genetic possibilities that make a tall plant, and only 1 that makes a short one. The 3-to-1 ratio explained perfectly. Okay, so let's see how this all builds, because Mendel didn't just stop with 1 trait. He started to wonder what would happen if he tracked 2 different traits at the same time. You know, like seed shape and seed color. Does inheriting one affect the other? So he set up another experiment. This time, he crossed a plant that had round green seeds with one that had wrinkled yellow seeds. And just so you know, round is dominant over wrinkled, and yellow is dominant over green. And just like before, that first generation of offspring only showed the dominant traits. Every single plant produced seeds that were round and yellow, completely hiding the wrinkled and green traits. But the real magic, once again, was just waiting in that next generation. And this led to Mendel's second great discovery. He found that these 2 traits, seed shape and seed color, they weren't linked at all. Just because a parent plant had round and green seeds didn't mean those traits had to stick together. Nope. Each trait was inherited completely independently, almost as if nature was rolling a separate set of dice for shape and for color.
This independent shuffling resulted in a more complex but still totally predictable ratio, 9 to 3 to 3 to 1. But look closely at what this really means. He didn't just get the original parent combinations back. He also got brand new ones that didn't exist before in this experiment. Round seeds that were green and wrinkled seeds that were yellow. This was absolute proof that traits are inherited separately, which is how new combinations, and ultimately more diversity, can show up in every generation.
So now for the big question, right? What is the physical thing happening behind all of this? How does a gene, this abstract little factor Mendel described, actually make a plant tall or its seeds round? Let's connect the rules to the actual biology.
I want you to think of it like a recipe book. The cell's DNA is the entire book. A gene is just one single recipe in that book, and it gives the instructions to make a specific protein. That protein, which is often a little molecular machine called an enzyme, then goes out and does a job in the cell. And the result of that job, that's the physical trait that we can actually see. Okay, so let's apply this to tallness. The dominant T gene is basically a recipe for a super efficient enzyme that just churns out a ton of growth hormone. Boom, you get a tall plant. The recessive T gene, on the other hand, has a tiny little typo in its recipe. This creates a less efficient version of that same enzyme. It still works, but it just produces less hormone, and that results in a shorter plant. It's such a beautiful example of how a tiny change at the genetic level can lead to a really big, visible difference.
All right, let's bring all of this home and apply everything we've learned to a really familiar human example, how biological sex is determined. You'll see this process also follows Mendel's rules, but it has a really unique twist.
So, how does this work in us? Well, inside our cells, our DNA is all tightly packed into these structures we call chromosomes. We have 23 pairs of them. The first 22 pairs are perfectly matched, carrying genes for everything from hair color to height, but that 23rd pair is unique. These are the sex chromosomes. Females typically have a matched pair of 2 X chromosomes, while males have a mismatched pair, 1 X and 1 much smaller Y chromosome.
Now, because a mother is XX, every single egg she produces contains a single X chromosome. That's it. That's all she can contribute. A father, however, is XY, and this means that half of his sperm will carry an X chromosome, and the other half will carry a Y.
And what this all means is that the biological sex of a child really just comes down to a 50-50 chance based on which sperm fertilizes the egg. Since the mother can only give an X, the deciding factor is the father's contribution. If an X-carrying sperm fertilizes the egg, the result is XX, a girl. If a Y-carrying sperm gets there first, the result is XY, a boy.
So from Mendel's simple pea plants all the way to our own incredibly complex genetic code, we can see how these rules of heredity reliably pass traits from one generation to the next, while also allowing for the variation that makes life so incredibly diverse. We've cracked the code for simple traits, which really just leaves us with a final massive question. What about the truly complex stuff, like intelligence or personality or our risk for certain diseases? How many genes are involved there, and how do they all interact? Well, that is the next great frontier in our quest to understand the beautiful complexity of heredity.